We're gonna see that it's working. I hope that it's working. There will be we'll go. Oh God, we're gonna get to the end of this thing and it's gonna say, "Sorry, were we supposed to be recording?"
No, I see
Or
it to see the big thing
yeah,
recording, so it
or
does say it.
it's not getting our video for some reason. No, it should be getting everything. I hope. Okay,
It
great.
should be. And you got enough room on your drive to hold it and
Yeah,
everything, right?
yeah, I have 500 gigabytes of podcast
5 billion
storage.
gigabytes. Okay.
5 billion gigabytes.
All right.
Well, here we are for the very first time
Very
in
first time.
for this podcast. Not for the first time together at all, but you are Gregory Wilson, author of the
You
Gray Shade series and many, many other things, and
y-
GM.
and you are Zach Clay, professional dungeon master, voice actor, content creator, musician of great renown.
You can stop there.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna
Yeah,
keep
yeah.
going on.
Well, great.
Yeah. So
And
this is us. Yeah.
yeah, this is us, and you GM me in the Mysterious Peaks officially sponsored
Yep.
Mysterious Peaks campaign, expedition from the Mysterious Peaks campaign, and then
Yes.
before that as per Genesis,
Yep. From
and
Alligator
then
Alley Entertainment.
right, and then I've never GM'd for you yet.
No, and that has to change.
That does have to
I
change.
I really want. Yeah, I'm actually really
Yeah,
looking forward to having you run something that I get to play in. That would be
at some
awesome.
point.
Yep.
So
But you've been a professional. Like I wasn't making that up. You've been a professional
yeah, yeah,
DM for a while now. Although it feels like it's much longer than it actually has been. You always are like, "Oh, I've been doing it for this long." I'm like, "Really?"
no,
Because it feels like five
yeah.
times that
It
amount
was
or something.
I started in fall of 2021, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's been all about 2 years. Wow. Gosh, that's weird.
See, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. That's crazy.
Is
Anyway,
what I'm saying.
yeah. So I actually so the first thing the inaugural question for all this
All right.
because the cool aspect of this whole podcast or vodcast, whatever we're going to call it, the whole point of it is us having some time to sit down and like exchange GMing tips and talk about storytelling. And a lot of these are the kinds of conversations. Also, those of you that are listening, you might be able to tell I'm recovering from some con cred from BlizzCon right now, so that'll put context as to what's going on. But we're here regardless. Um, Part of this is like these are the kinds of conversations that you don't really that don't really just naturally come up. Like, let me ask you about your life story, or like the way you deeply think about this subject.
Right.
Those
Right.
aren't average conversations, so it's a great excuse to like learn more from each other. So my first question, and something that again, as with each of these that I know barely anything about, are there aspects you can think of as an author yourself that ways of like how yourself as a writer and an author overlaps with your GMing? Like, is there something that when you're GMing, whether it's like how you do NPCs or like crafting a story? Now, I know you've run a lot of stories that are written by other people, so
Hmm.
I'm interested to see how like your mind as a writer affects those stories as well. But that's kind of like the vein, the vibe of the question that I'm asking essentially is like how me myself, not an author and only writing for when I need to DM and not in any other capacity. How does yourself as an author, like, do you see ways that that affects your GMing, or like what how it improves it or
Yeah.
makes it more difficult? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. No, it is a good inaugural question.
Thanks.
So I actually have run workshops on this about the crossover between game, dungeon mastering for the writer, writing for the dungeon master type of stuff. Because there are a lot of connections there. One of the connections is associated, I think, with so for me, right, whenever I'm creating any kind of world that I'm writing for, and I write mostly speculative fiction, when I'm writing for
You what's
speculative fiction is that's like basically the broad umbrella of fantasy, science fiction, and horror.
Oh,
in various iterations. So it's just a kind of, it's sort of the fiction of what if. And a lot of things kind of fit under that umbrella.
okay.
And there are different versions of that, you know, like Slipstream, which is kind of fantasy and science fiction mixed together and whatever. But it all basically fits under the kind of speculative fiction kind of you know, overall theme, I guess. So when I write that, that's about questions, right? It's about asking questions. It's about what kind of a world do I want to create? What kind of people exist in the world given the parameters that I've created? What sorts of a world would be formed by people that lived in it? So it's a back and forth thing, right? It's the world creates the people create the world. The NPCs, if you will, in the case of fiction, the characters that I'm writing,
Right.
you know, create it. So a lot of that stuff comes through in DMing, obviously, in the sense that I'm asking a lot of those same questions about what thematically matters in a campaign. I have written some stuff, so Tales and Tomes from the Forbidden Library, which is also an Alligator Alley product,
Hmm.
that has my series of adventures, the first one of which, of course, you played in,
Yeah.
which is Night of the Forbidden Library. But that Forbidden Library stuff was all, you know, that was all written by me. But there too, it was part of an academy. I knew the library was part of an academy. It had this forbidden wing. And one of the questions I had was, what sorts of things would make people want to just shut off a wing of a library? And what kind of an environment, what kind of a culture would have to exist that would just accept that? Like, okay, so we just don't get to go there for 20 years, and
Yeah.
that's fine. And something disastrous happened, and no one talks, you know, like, and people are curious about it. There's lots of rumors, but there's no, you know, congressional investigation going, no, seriously, what the hell is in the forbidden library? Like what, right? And so that there are those assumptions get brought up through these questions. So being a writer has meant that as a DM, I get to think about those thematic questions when I'm certainly doing my own writing within the game universe, but also when I'm writing and or designing the worlds of other people, when I'm running the worlds of other people,
Yeah.
I do an enormous amount of like connective tissue in between adventures. Sometimes because some of
Mm.
the adventures that I ran, like the campaign I ran for you, and you know this, of course, for Esper Genesis, like there were times where I was literally getting stuff from them the morning of the night that I was going to run that next portion of the campaign.
Yeah.
So like there were stuff where I honestly felt like I was just the classic video game, you know, you're running and like the ledges are coming up underneath your character. Like I
Yeah.
just, oh my
Yeah.
God. And that, so that was honestly like a big part of what I drew on heavily there was my ability to know about, again, how I would answer those various questions that come up in that process. So world building is the big thing, and the other thing is just character design, like
Yeah.
character development, because developing characters and understanding what makes them tick and the things that are sort of externally visible about them, which is
Mm.
easier, frankly. The external ticks are easier than getting the internal motivations that lead you to
Yeah.
the ticks, right?
Exactly.
So like a lot of that
Is
stuff I can paint for you as players, and
right.
you know, and you'll be like, ah, that means this X, Y, or Z, and internally that may not be what's going on, but I don't have to
Right.
worry as much about that when I'm doing in the GM set.
Is that is there a certain work of fiction that inspires you specifically for like character design or that you can think of that kind of
Uh,
influenced how you describe things or
well, I mean, I'm not sure that I could reduce it to one. I often find myself drawing upon elements of books that had a big influence on me when I was younger. You know, Lord of the Rings is obvious for me because Lord of the Rings was like one of the things that turned me into a reader in the first place. So that
yeah.
that had a very definitive part of my, you know, had a big effect on my development. But you
Yep.
know, Ursula Le Guin's Wizard of Earthsea, which I think is not only great world building, but it does it compactly. I think that's the thing also is that I'm a big fan of having one thing do many things. So if you can be distilled in the way that you create your worlds in DMing, it has a huge effect, I think, on people's ability to be able to grasp it, understand what's going on in the world, and then feel like they can then contribute to how the world unfolds, as opposed to this big sprawling, like, okay, well, in our session 0, we're going to spend 6 hours discussing the economic systems of here's how the sewers ran in the following 35,
Yeah.
right? Like that stuff is not, you know, you as the DM probably will know some of these elements, your players don't need to know these elements unless it matters to them that they have to know about the sewer systems, right? So that distilled world building is something which is very helpful, and the Le Guin book is very good at being able to kind of lock a bunch of things in with relative ease and without having to go on about it for 15 pages. So
Mm,
those are two that I would say off the top of my head, and then various D&D books as far as D&D stuff specifically, Dragonlance and Salvatore's work, Ed Greenwood, people like this that
hmm.
wrote these books who were also working in Dungeons and Dragons. That helps specifically with D&D, but just in general, it helps to have a sense of, what the world building is like for a lot of those particular books, regardless of the system you're running it in. So,
You mentioned Ed Greenwood, and you just reminded me
yeah, Ed,
that I got a chance to meet Ed Greenwood at Big Bad Con actually.
good people, Ed.
Yeah, it was it was very funny because it was at a huge meet and greet, and all these people were there. Matthew Mercer was actually there, um, and a whole bunch of people that are well known for their faces in the
Mm-hmm.
RPG space. But when
Mm-hmm.
I was looking around, I had only just recently watched videos with Ed Greenwood in them because Baldur's Gate 3 had just come out, and he was like doing interviews about Baldur's Gate,
Right.
and so I had only just seen what he looked like because he's not, although he is one of the forefathers of D&D and of that setting that D&D now uses, like he's not some tabletop celebrity necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw him standing, and no one was going up. Like a flurry of people had gone up to meet and greet him initially, but then there was a period where everyone else was still mingling, and then he was just kind of sitting.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, is that the creator of Baldur's Gate and
It's
of
Santa
the
Claus.
entire
That must be Ed Greenwood because that's what he
yeah, I
looks like.
know
Yeah.
that I it was like, what is the Santa Claus of D&D? So I walked over and I was like, are you Ed Greenwood? And he was like, yeah. And I felt like I was talking to like the Messiah of D&D. Like it was like the his beard was so white and holy, and so many
His
distinct
beard was so
fantasy
white. Mhm.
things had been spawned. So yes. Anyway, that was a strangely reminiscent sidebar there, but
No, that's funny.
yeah, it was
No,
very cool talking to him.
Ed's good people. I did a reading with Ed years ago at a conference at a convention in Canada, which no longer exists, called Ad Astra. And at the time, I want to say I had brought my daughter at the time, and she was much younger, and she kind of gave him a hug because he reminded her of Santa Claus or
Oh
something,
my
and it was
god.
like, yeah, he was that was something. And I have to say, the name of this show is GenGMs, and the idea is that Zach is slightly younger than me, slightly, just
Only
just a little
slightly.
bit, just a
Yeah.
little bit. And so thinking about what it was like when I was first getting into D&D back in literally the mid 80s,
Right.
and with the red box, which I have here, which I'll show off later. Like the idea that Ed Greenwood, who did these Forgotten Realms, and I actually grew up even before that. I mean, like I had access to Greyhawk and stuff like that,
Yeah.
which was the original setting that Gary
Right.
Gygax set it in. But
Got it.
Forgotten Realms obviously was a big part from a very early stage. The idea that young me would at some point would have published books with one of Ed's publishing companies and would like have played, I've been Ed has DM'd a game for me. I've played with Ed as a DM,
Wow.
me DMing for him. That's pretty wild, like given the circumstances and like what he meant, what D&D meant to me personally. So yeah,
Hmm.
that's and he's good people and very prolific, even to this
Hmm.
day with the stuff he writes. So yeah.
The but I guess before we move to the next section, the other thing in regards to that I think have always thought relates to you as an author is you when I've been under you as a player, or when you've been DMing for me rather, the dialogue that you seem to be able to come up with off the cuff for NPCs that sometimes you have to invent, in the moment, but the dialogue that you create for your NPCs is very deep, very impressive in the same way that like you'll drop these hints of like physical description that maybe it's a bit of a the Wizard of Oz, and like we think it's much deeper than it actually is, but you can you pull out these like deep quotes and like uh, idioms and things that these NPCs bring up that gosh, I even have some that I've
You
saved.
have some of the
I have
idioms that
some
I've
of
heard
the
that look brought
yeah,
up.
I have some of the
Wow.
aphorisms that you've said.
Wow.
Um, oh yeah, I like one of these. Okay, this is you as a
Okay.
random NPC in a D&D
Okay.
game saying,
Okay.
one need not know where the source of a river is to know that it has one. How do you just come up with that?
Hmm.
And I don't even remember. Hold on,
That's
I
actually not bad.
remembered it. I didn't even find it in my files yet. I just remembered it as I was searching for it.
I mean,
Um,
well, while you're searching for it, I'll say like the
yeah,
answer to
yeah,
that is um a lot of reading. A lot of
yes.
reading, like thousands of books.
Mm,
Not just of speculative fiction, but of all over the place. My father was an English professor. I am an English professor.
right.
And so I read and teach this stuff. So I lived and breathed it for, I mean, God knows, many decades now. So a lot of it is that, like, you just sort of osmotically absorb, honestly, a
You
lot of
think
that
so?
stuff. And yeah, like there's no question that that has a kind of a there's it does sort of just sink into you a little bit. Like it becomes I've sometimes sat at panels and gotten frustrated with people who are just kind of like, writing never gets easier, it's always exactly just as hard as the first time. It never That's nonsense. Like
Mm,
nobody would do it, frankly, if it was given how hard it already is. They
yeah.
wouldn't do it if it was always just exactly as hard. What they mean by that is that you set yourself new challenges, you push yourself
Mm,
in different directions, you get more ambitious. Like, that's all true. But the idea that it's exactly as hard, on your fifth or 10th or 30th or 65th book or whatever as it is on your first one is absolute nonsense. It's not true. And part of the reason for that is that you've just absorbed more of it, right? Like you have more tools in the toolbox, as my friend Brad Bollier and DAW author likes to say. You have more tools in the toolbox to go to. And that's one of the things that's nice about DMing as well, is that because there's so much, I imagine that you find this too. There's so much like snippet storytelling that happens, little bits of lore. And like,
yeah.
this is what I mean, lore stuff turns my crank anyway on like magic cards and things like that, right? Just the little bits of lore that like quotes on things. And I actually
Right.
did some quote text for the game Ascension, where I was doing flavor text like that. And I love that stuff because
Yeah.
that every one of those is almost its own little story seed. And those little story snippets just become part and parcel of the kind of fabric of how you produce worlds. And it creates this sense of credibility because people are like, oh my God, like there's like this whole built-in under universe. And there is some of that universe. And then some of it is just, no, that's stuff that I made up based upon other things. And
Yeah.
the secret, dear viewers, is to not ever be able to have your players know which is which.
Right.
If they can't tell if you just made that up just now, or if it was like something you built up for time, then that's how you do it if you can
Yeah.
manage it. So,
Sometimes I'm so cheeky that I can't resist telling my players like I had that in my bank for so
well, no,
long. I've
no,
been
that,
waiting to
yeah,
use
yeah. If
that,
it's
you
a
know.
good line, if it's a
Yeah.
good line,
Yep, I found it. The original source, it says, if a river flows, one need excuse me, hold on, let me do that again. If a river flows, one need not see its source to know it has one. That's from Esper Genesis episode 73, which I think on the count is like one of our last episodes.
probably. You
Um,
know what that actually is reminding me of? I wonder
mm,
if it comes from, I bet it comes from this. I bet you want to hear the most random like comparison? It
what?
comes from, I bet, an original Star Trek episode called Court Martial, in which Spock is testifying on behalf of Captain Kirk, who's been accused of basically like negligence that led to a crewman's death.
Yeah.
And Spock says, um, if I drop an object on a planet with a specific gravity, I need not see it fall to know that it has in fact fallen. And something about that
Uh,
kind of always made me so the
wow.
sort of what I gave you there was somewhat different, but
Mm,
the sort of shape of it, like, is more, because that was something that just stood out to me when I was younger.
wow.
I'm like, oh, that's such a cool, wow, that's such a cool way to say that. And so yeah, that's one thing. People who do nothing but just focus only on very limited game systems or genres, I think, are doing themselves a disservice. If you can read widely, if you can consume media widely, if you can and go to other game systems, not just D&D, even though that's, I think, yours and my both favorite, but there are other systems that exist that you have so many ways to mix and match and put together and come and develop in this sort of elaborate way, which makes it your own. That's really where creativity lies. It's generally not completely, I've never ever heard of this before. It's more the way in which you've put things together has changed everything together. Shakespeare himself, right? Shakespeare had not a single original plot, not one.
Mm,
Shakespeare didn't do one original plot. Everything he had was ripped off from something else. What was different about
wow.
Shakespeare is the way that he executes it, right? And the characters he chooses to emphasize, and the ways that he takes things away or adds motivations back in. So if you learn to be able to do that in DMing and game mastering, and you can add in these motivations or remove them or shift them, then you have your own unique world that has been drawn together from elements from others, but it's still yours because of the way that it's put together.
All right.
Man.
Yeah,
All right,
I
my
think that's
turn.
good.
My
Okay. Yeah, let's do it.
So my turn to ask you.
Hmm.
So you have
Yep.
been doing professional DM work, as we said, for several years now.
Yeah.
So what I want to ask is, and there's a two-part question.
Okay.
First, I want to ask how you think for you being a professional DM as opposed to doing it in a more amateur fashion,
Hmm.
how that has sort of changed the way that you've had to go about preparation, the stories you tell, the way that you make rulings with player combat decisions and whatever.
Hmm.
So there's that. And the second thing I want to ask is, do you think professionalization is hurting or helping the field? But I want to start with you, like what you do.
Yeah. So the first part of the question kind of being how running professionally has shaped how I DM
Right.
and changed it. So the first thing that comes off the top of my head is aside from running professionally now, a lot of the DMing that I kind of remember that or that comes to mind is the DMing that I do for kids still,
Hmm.
because I have a program in San Francisco that gosh started in January, and then we're restarting this month, and then I still help my after school club at my alma mater at my high school. And so when I'm running for these kids and they're running their games as well, there's aspects of my DMing that I'm incorporating that are only there from the professional part that they are not even aware of. Or when I'm
Right.
watching them run their games and seeing them go through mistakes or things that I've made a million times, especially professionally.
Right.
So with that context, I'd say the first thing is when you add professional to anything, it there's a certain list of things that comes with professional, and one of them is time management,
Hmm.
and mostly on the degree of real life time management, not necessarily the game's time management. um like in games, like, oh, make sure that the travel times between these regions are doing this, but like how you balance the emotional and story and content arc
Yeah.
of a 3 to 4 hour session.
Yeah.
So I have been in so many student run games, or even other professional games, or pickup games, or convention games at this point that run overtime. I have rarely, if ever, of all the hundreds of games I've ever played where I've been DM'd, been in a game that ran that ended early. Combat, especially in a system like D&D, runs for twice as long as anyone thinks it ever will.
Yeah.
And knowing that and keeping that in mind has saved me so much time and so much grief over knowing that players would be upset. No one wants to be held over for anything. So I'd say that's the number one thing, is like a supreme cognizance of time, um, in the aspect that, like, when especially when I have clients that are paying for a good time, if they're having a good time, and especially if we talked about it beforehand, if we run over 10 minutes, 15 minutes or whatever, or they're we push over, then that's okay. But trying to keep everything pared down, and then what comes with that is, if a combat's running long, how can you end a combat early but still have it be
Mm.
just as, or at least getting towards as
Yeah,
satisfying, right?
satisfying.
Um,
Do you charge them an additional $5 for every 10 minutes that they just do it?
I should. No,
You aim for the dragon. You're like, I'm sorry, you're
no,
going to need another $5 if you'd like
yeah,
to see whether it hits the dragon.
yeah, no. Oftentimes though, they are, it being a job that I genuinely enjoy, that's also a hobby. Usually, unless I really am short on time, I have no problem running overtime. And then oftentimes for a client, unless they also have something to do, they're like, hey, we're just getting more bang for our buck and we get to keep having fun. Um, if I don't charge them more, which I don't. So, um, regardless though, like it has made my combats much more punchy, much shorter, and trying to get to the point of like also like pointless combats. Once you realize several rounds in, like nothing plot wise is happening, something needs
Yeah,
to change.
yeah,
So that's one of the big aspects. Professional wise as well, I this I guess will be this answer will bridge between the first and second question that you asked,
yeah.
because something that is always my concern is sort of the longer individual player moments. Like let's say that there's a player who meets an NPC from their backstory, and there's a moment where the whole party's involved in that conversation with that new NPC, but then there's a sidebar with that new NPC with the character that they know, and that lasts for like 30 minutes, like a conversation between one player character and one NPC.
Right.
In your general D&D game, that's awesome. The some of the players kind of end up being audience members for up to 30 minutes, or if you let it go even longer, but it's entertaining, it's building the story. There's nothing wrong with it. But a concern that I've had, and this is kind of where it bleeds into the second part of like how professionalism is helping or hindering it, is in the back of my mind, I'm like, I always want to make sure that when a player is paying for a game with me, that they are getting a full experience out of it. And so while those moments that only focus on one player are great and they serve the story and the plot, in the back of my mind, I'm always like, oh no, now all of the other players are just having to sit there.
Yeah.
And if they have a good attitude about it, and not that that's even the answer, but if they are like, yeah, I'm here for the story, especially if it's a campaign, then they don't seem to mind as much. But that's something like in a one shot that I will immediately try to nip at the bud as quickly as possible. And it's a shame because I love those moments, but um, that's one area where I feel like because people are giving you their hard-earned cash, I want to feel like they have involvement, they have agency, they have activity at as many moments in the session as possible.
Hmm.
um and so that's been one difficulty, but one thing that has uh, is sort of positive, at least in as a counter to that, is it's led to me playing a lot more games a lot more consistently. Because when people are there for a professional game, I show up ready to run. I'm not having lazy days where I'm not prepared, because again, there's people that are paying for a service, for entertainment, for an event. And so I'm coming juiced and jazzed and ready and with content, and so are they. And the sessions are always really intense, really involved, because everyone is there for that time. And also, too, if it's a campaign, like people don't want to miss a week. I don't want to miss a week. And so it ends up adding a strange level of consistency to it. In At the end of the day, as someone who wishes that we did not need to live in a capitalist society, I wouldn't mind if, you know, I'm very glad to be able to do D&D as a job and
Hmm.
to make money doing it. I wish that none of us had to have to make money doing anything.
Yeah.
Um, and so there are negative aspects to it, of like, the way that it causes changes in content, or I don't know. Sometimes I end up running, if someone has paid for a campaign of a specific module, for example, that normally maybe I'm not very interested in, or I would rather be running a homebrew campaign. But I you would never catch me running a homebrew campaign professionally again, just because that's such a wild west territory for running something for people that you haven't even tested, or if the lines are connected, or you're also building it out as it's happening, you know.
Right, 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 right,
So
right, right.
anyway, that was a
Is
whole
there
bunch of
like,
different things.
is there like, and I'm, what you were saying about this sort of external valuation kind of interests me, because like the idea that people are more likely to, you know, show up, be there, everyone wants to be there. No one wants to miss a week, because
Yeah.
then they're wasting money, right?
Right.
Like I mean, and yes, there's an element of
Yeah.
it that they also don't want to miss the story-based campaign.
Mhm.
But as someone myself who has not really done this, I mean, I run a Twitch TV channel for many years that has many tabletop, campaigns as part of it, and I've done stuff live on stage, as you know, with you,
Yeah.
and elsewhere, Gen Con and so on. But even those things are, the payment has come sort of by proxy, like where I'm doing
Mhm.
workshops on DMing or whatever, but not so much that the players are paying me to DM. I've never had that
Right.
experience.
Yeah.
And so that I think is interesting to me. Do you think the external valuation of it, um I guess this is sort of the broader, like, big picture view, because obviously this has become very popular, and there are a lot of people now who are, out there trying to make it as professional DMs, people paying them, willing to pay them for this,
Yeah.
online and offline. Does it alter the calculus in a way that's potentially problematic, where people are like, I'm paying you for this theme park ride, right?
Mhm.
And if the theme park ride is not what I want it to be, if it doesn't sort of advance my backstory,
Right.
or doesn't get me, then in that circumstance, this thing is a failure and I'm going to be mad. Do you feel that kind of pressure based upon this external thing that's been added, which is now we're exchanging money, and now it's not now it's got real world consequences for like our bottom line and finances? And maybe it hasn't had this, but I'm wondering if it's
Yeah.
had that effect on you.
If this was my only source of freelance income, then I think I would be a little more worried than I have been. Um, but to answer that, I've been in situations, even the very first professional campaign that I ever ran, it was I believe, yeah, it was a full six-player game, 6 or 7 player game of people that had never played together before. It was essentially a public campaign, which meant 6 or 7 random people all signed up and then ended up joining this
Hmm.
public campaign. And after 2 sessions, excuse me, after 2 sessions, one of the guys decided it wasn't for him and left. And for the most part, it's always been, I've never, I mean, I've run a lot of games now, one shots and campaigns, and I've never had someone leave or express complaint to the point of, or like threatening leaving or something, or pulling out their money or whatever, because of their character getting neglected, or
Hmm.
something of that order. I would like to say that's because I'm very cognizant of not wanting that to happen, but
Sure.
I think in general, I don't know. I think there's a certain amount of, because there is a difference when you're a GM versus something like an amusement park ride. There's a very poignant example I can give, a recent example, that my brother and I went to Disneyland only a couple days ago, and the best ride in California's Disneyland at the moment, in my opinion, is Star Wars: Rise of the Resistance. And there's just so
I've heard
much.
that.
Yes,
Yeah.
there is so much that they have put together as far as ride technology and philosophy and design, and then this moment at the end that you look forward to every time. Like, it's so good. It is this is an opinion that I have also been made aware is shared by many other people that now are aware of the ride. So much so that, like, every time you go, the wait time for a ride at Disneyland is, average an hour, 30 minutes to an hour. Okay. That's for a pretty intenser wait. But for Rise of the Resistance, you're looking at average 90 minutes to 2 hours. And they implemented a thing where you can pay, I think at the time that we did it, it was like $24 to instantly skip the line.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
pay $24 to just zip to the front and not have to wait 90 minutes. And of course, my brother and I looked at each other and we were like, okay. And we did it. Um, and you know exactly what you're going to get if you've been on the ride before. But I think there's a certain level of like, yes, although there is money involved in a professional campaign, there's also, I think, a certain give and take, especially when it comes to campaigns, where players understand, at least from my perspective as a DM, players understand that some sessions are going to be focused on their characters more, and other
Hmm.
sessions will be on the other characters more. And they may have a session where that they didn't enjoy the most, but they also will have sessions that are some of the best sessions that they've ever played of D&D ever. And so I think because I'm a human and because they know that I am reacting to everything that they do and everything that's happening in the story in real time, and I'm not a static amusement park ride that they are just booking for the same experience every time,
Right.
that there has been a certain level of human, you know, forgiveness and understanding that's been exchanged in the midst of that very capitalistic exchange,
That's
I
hopeful.
guess.
Yeah,
Um,
that's hopeful.
but yeah, no, it's interesting. I think the only other thing I'd say in the answer to that is like, I brought up the first campaign I ran where someone left early. The He was just saying, he was looking for a more, as he described it, like a more traditional run and gun, dungeon delving, kill monsters over and over and over kind of war game experience, where it was obvious that the campaign I was starting to run was much more narrative, much more,
Yeah.
for some of those players if they were familiar with Critical Role, kind of like that. And so um I've had more cases of players that just realize that it's the not the vibe of game that they're going for, rather than them outright being dissatisfied with it. And then as a result of that, I haven't been put in a situation where then I'm in a problem or I'm stressed out because I'm afraid of losing players or things. The
Hmm.
only thing that does cause that is just me wanting to make sure that every session is as good as I can make it, and wanting to, if you're offering a paid service for anyone, like if that, as an author, I guess I wonder how that relates to you, as an author. It's obviously very different, but I wonder how it's similar in that, people have to buy your book, or books,
Yeah.
and so to a certain extent it's different because it's not a live experience. They pick it up and they read it and you may never know, but um it's a body of work that you rightly believe should be paid for in this capitalistic society. And if they don't like it, then they could not get the other book. If they love it, they get the rest in the series, or they back you on Kickstarter, or you
Yeah.
know but
Well, it's interesting too because they go into it expecting a good tale, and then if they like it, then they expect that they will pick up the sequel and will also get a good tale. And authors have characteristics, and eventually readers figure out like these are the characteristics that this author possesses that I like. They have I really enjoy their dialogue or their world building or their character design or the themes are really fascinating to me or whatever. The tech is cool if it's science fiction or whatever, right?
yeah.
And so those characteristics exist, and so they kind of know a little bit more about what you're getting. What strikes me about what you said is each of the D&D stuff that we're talking about, when they sit down for an adventure with you, they really are paying you to set the foundation for the story that will be collectively told, right? Because this is D&D is a collective storytelling endeavor, and writing is a individual authorial endeavor where I'm writing a story. I know the plot, I know the work, I'm producing the characters. You can hope that something will happen, XYZ will happen to a character, but it's my call whether it does, right? Whereas in Dungeons and Dragons and any tabletop role-playing game generally, I don't fully know what will happen, and I think it's actually very dangerous to go into as a DM, this is exactly how the story is going to play out,
Right.
because it will be vastly different depending on the personalities involved, how the backstories play in together, what the characters actually want to do. They may themselves change their minds. There are I one of our mutual friends, Trent Sparks, has talked quite a bit about the experience that one of a fellow friend of his had with their Curse of Strahd campaign. And I ran a Curse of Strahd campaign on my Twitch TV channel for a number of years. The audio podcast is actually still finishing up. It's probably got another 8 months to go or so.
Oh wow.
Like my version of Curse of Strahd was not at all the version of Curse of Strahd. Like I couldn't believe the stuff that I was being told that Trent would relay from this friend. Like, and then they did this, and I'm like, they did what? Like it was just a totally different experience, because the characters process in different ways and move in different directions. So in a way, I guess the professional DM is setting up the foundation for the collaborative story will be told, and that's what they're sitting down. That's what they're paying you for. They're not paying you for bring me through the ride of resistance, the rise of the resistance ride that I love, but tell me a great story and help me collectively tell a great story with everybody else.
Yeah.
Help make it possible for me to tell great stories through your knowledge and wisdom and all that. And I guess that's kind of what the professional DM is doing in this context.
Yeah. In a way, they're, I don't know, it's paying for a space where, like you said, an amazing collective story can be told. Um, I think too, one of the last things I'll say is from a lot of clients I've heard of, you know, the nightmare stories that they've told me of past D&D DMs that have
Yeah,
been
yeah, pretty
incredibly
amazing.
inconsistent or
Oof.
rude or all these issues that you go to a professional to so that you don't have to deal with.
Yes.
And I would say it's a testament to me again that I haven't had to run into an issue where a player has been, incredibly upset with something that happened or an expectation that wasn't met or whatever.
Well, you're too good. I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, this is the big problem.
I'm amazing. I'm the
Listen, if
best
I
out
had
there.
like, this is not called suck GMs, okay? This is called
Yeah.
Gen GMs. Like if you were terrible, then obviously.
So but
But
yeah,
no, that's it. And yeah, it is a good point that if you do it right, this shouldn't come up much, I guess is the point. But I was
right.
curious if the professional component adds something different. That's interesting. Yeah.
So yeah. Cool.
Is that all we had for questions?
No, I have another one. Um, if you, I didn't have anything more to say about mine for
No,
now.
that's good.
Okay.
So let's do one more.
Okay, good.
And see how that comes through.
Okay. So this is an interesting one. I realized that don't know anything about you or much about you being GM'd yourself rather
Mm,
than being the GM. Both of us kind of forever GMs
yep. Yep.
who are rarely players. So my question is, can you think of a campaign or a one shot or like a single session, whatever, of D&D or any other game that was particularly memorable for you, where you were a player, and it is something that maybe, especially if it's something from when you were younger. Like I don't know anything about if like were you DM'd when you were talking about being in the 80s? Like did you DM even back then? Did you have a DM? Like so what was that like? Especially is I don't know if there's a story about a GM that you had that now influences how you GM because
Mm.
I would never have known that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, so I'll say that my first ever experience in literally happens in sixth grade during recess when I'm playing Keep on the Borderlands, the classic Keep on the Borderlands module. And I
What?
still remember the name of the DM, Aaron Holcomb. I had no idea what the hell was going on. Like it was just very much like and then you go like there's this cave, and I'm like, yeah, we go inside the cave, and
Yeah,
of course and he's like, all right, there are these creatures that are sneering you. I'm like, well, I attacked them then. You're like, I didn't know what I was doing,
yeah.
right? I mean, um, but that experience, and then the experience of I said I was going to show this off,
Hmm.
the red box,
The
the
red
original
box,
red
the
box,
OG.
okay, not one of
Yep.
the later ones,
Hold
okay.
on. Speaking of, I have it 2 feet away from me here. Hold one has a bunch of books they're about to. Okay. Yes. Whose is the
There you
real
go.
one? Whose
There you
is the
go.
yours is. Yours
You
is.
could, yeah, well,
Yeah.
right. And like, and I mean, just these things were like a big thing for me. And I had, character events and things like that that I did. I'm wondering if I have, yeah. See, this was one of my first, you're gonna, you will appreciate the writing of this. See,
Oh my
so you can
God.
see,
So,
uh,
and that's back from when you used it?
yep,
So when
yep.
would this have been?
This is 86,
Oh my
87.
God.
So it's all like, so you can see saving throws. This is first edition still. So we're talking about like, poison or
Where
death
you're counting
ray and all that kind of stuff.
experience,
You can also, my
magic
writing
items.
was truly horrific.
Wow.
I had a scroll and I was playing solo in this one in a thing called Lion Castle.
Wow.
Um, and my character name, fascinatingly, was Greg the Great. I was really, let me tell you, I was straight up using logic at the time.
uh,
But like, so that's kind of a cheat because that was playing a solo module. But the
yeah.
thing about this at the time is that the GM, as I said, I remember the name and everything. It was just the possibility. It was the scope. It was the scale. It was the stuff that I could do that you couldn't do with any other game. I had the games that everybody else had. I had Monopoly and I had, Sorry, and I had,
Yeah.
games that you will not have heard of like Rough House and Bonkers, but they were games that people played back then.
Yeah.
I had all those, I had that stuff, but this was totally different. This was a world in which you really could construct a story narratively for yourself with your own character. You could imagine it in your head. And so that stuff really stood out to me as a player first. The appeal to me as a DM is the fact that I then got to shape that world. And without getting into this too much now, although I hope we'll get into it in future episodes,
Mhm.
but like I was very badly bullied as a kid, and one of the things that was not to put, I don't want to be hyperbolic about it, that was kind of salvational for me at the time was feeling like I had a world that I had some control over,
Yeah.
that I could decide how things would be laid out, and I could tell the story. I didn't like tell people what to do as their characters, but just that I knew what was coming out of that room,
Hmm.
with the bulging door, right? Like I was
Mm.
not going to be freaked out by it. That was not a
Right.
bully who was going to attack me. That was something I controlled.
Yeah.
So that was sort of the appeal for DMing for me. But the player aspect of it was just the scope and the scale.
Mm.
Um, the two other ones that I'll mention, one sort of mid-career and then one that's very recent. One of them was that I got to play in a pickup Dungeons and Dragons game at the game store owned by Gary Gygax's son, where
Right.
they had played with Gary Gygax in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, because I happened to be there for a con, and like literally, it's this game store where in the back of there's like it's like a secret passage, really. Like you
Hmm.
literally open up the bookcase to get back to this room. Like it was, and I was playing with these two kids and this much older DM. So the DM was like, I don't know, 20 years older than me. And I was doing this probably about 10 years ago. So I'm in my early 40s there. And he's like in his 60s. And then these kids that are like 18 and
Oh
like,
my
like very,
gosh.
very young, right? And I had a blast because it was very much like a kind of a dungeon crawl. How do you get into the cave and avoid the giant and like all that kind of stuff. But there was not going to be extensive story development, but it was just the stories and the things that happened reminded me of playing Dungeons and Dragons in my house in snowstorms where you'd look outside
Mm.
and there was just snow outside the window, but inside you've got the fire, you've got plenty of food, you've got some friends, and you're
Hmm.
telling stories, and that is absolutely the best. So that was reminiscent of that. And then the last thing is Valorword, which is the award-winning Speculate show that I've been doing my Speculate podcast with my co-host Brandon O'Brien and Michael R. Underwood. Mike Underwood has been the GM for that, and that's been really, really well done because it's based on originally Blades in the Dark. The system is called Court of Blades, but
Yeah.
it's based a little bit on Blades in the Dark, a modified version of that by John Harper. And the Drakes are the ones who did this Court of Blades. And it is like I've been able to create a character there called Carevis Diorencio, who has this real sense of honor. He's a bravo in this world that would remind you vaguely of kind of like a Renaissance Caribbean island with houses of honor and stuff like that. And it's so much fun to actually play it because I can just kind of sink into a character without worrying about how do I balance all of these factions against each other. I don't have to balance anything against anything. That's Mike's job, right? That's the
Yeah,
GM's job. My
yeah.
job is to be the best player that I can be and think about the members of my House Forster, which I'm sworn to protect. But I'm
Mm.
sworn to protect them because that's what my character is doing, not because if I don't do that, it's going to screw up 3 other political interactions down the
Yeah.
line. So, like, as a player, that is the stuff that I really enjoy, being able to sink my teeth into a character. And it helps my DMing later because later on, when I then go to play other NPCs and things like that, I
Mm.
can remember, right, the way in which I had to play the player character, and how I sort of sank into those moments and really just kind of embraced it. So I do. I mean, in general, I love DMing and GMing overall. It's probably what I prefer to do.
Yeah.
But I do love these moments of being able to be a player and to just settle into a character because of what it reminds me of what I was doing in 6th grade, what it reminds me of 10, 12 years ago when I was running into other scenarios like this. And then now that I can still enjoy, and I have the same passion for it that I always did. I don't know if you feel the same way. I feel the same way that I always have about the game and about the incredible way it has in bringing people together and bringing communities together to tell stories.
Yeah.
I love that as a player and a GM. So yeah, there's plenty of stories, but those are the 3 I think for me as a player. What
Well,
about you? So you tell, like, what's the best like player moment for you, or like a thing that
oh,
you can remember as a player?
I will till the end of time, though he may not like it.
That's
I
a long
will
time.
I will gush forever about my hometown GM, Elijah. We went to high school together. He's still local. He's helped me with the San Francisco program. Actually, he and
Cool.
I would you know go into San Francisco and run games for these kids. Um, there at that program, he GM'd me in and our friends in a 45 session long campaign of Vampire the Masquerade.
Oh, nice.
Um, and as Bay Area locals, obviously our setting, because for those that don't know, Vampire the Masquerade is usually set in real world Earth, usually at the present or some earlier time. And so we said it was San Francisco by night is what he called it, which I think is also there's got to be, all the major cities have some podcasts out there, like there's
Yeah,
LA
yeah.
by night,
Pod by night. Pod.
right,
Yeah, yeah,
right.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
anyway, our little
Where's the
home game.
midday? I want to know where the midday noon vampire stories are, though. Like, why
Yeah, no,
why
no.
is there such a
Yes,
dearth of
SF by approximately 12:36 p.m.
Oklahoma by noon? Like, where's my,
Yes. Yeah, no. That's because nothing happens. No.
except the destruction of vampires out at that
Yeah.
time, I guess. But yeah.
I he so okay, as a GM, one of the things that I uh really admire about Elijah, he's very consistent out of game, which really helps. He was constantly, even if we were starting to slack on, like, I mean, we always wanted to play, but maybe we had scheduling conflicts or whatever. The job of scheduling sessions, which, as you know, can be terrible
Oh God, the
and
true boss, the true
nauseating
boss.
for a GM who's also got to GM the sessions. You also got to wrangle the players together. Um, Elijah did it, and I mean, we still showed up, and we loved showing up for it every week. But he was so damn consistent about it too that we finished a 45 session campaign. We owe that to him, I think, because if he had left us to our own devices, even though we all really wanted to play, just the natural chaos of no one being put as the schedule person would have made it
Yeah,
fall apart. So there's that, and that was a huge help. And then I think that you know that aspect sort of bleeds into GMing as well. It's like when you're incredibly consistent as a person, then it's all right. Like, we're showing up for a game. He has the same intro where he plays the same music, where he does his recap. That's something that I took from him, is I play the same intro music in all my professional games and when I do a recap. And so that brings me back to this one, like, third party, royalty free track that Elijah would play at the start of our SF by Night campaign. Um, and I guess that was the biggest thing. I mean, like my first jamming experience was my friend Silas running D&D 3.5 for me when I was a sophomore in high school, I think.
Mhm.
Um, and Silas comes from a super into fantasy family. Like his dad has a rite of passage ritual for his children, Silas being one of them, where like when they become adults, like they have to become an Eagle Scout was one of them. They have to, which already has its own stuff involved in it. And then like all these other things like do an active service, blah blah blah. And then Silas's dad would take that kid on a solo camping trip just with the dad and Silas or whoever, and then just have a chat about what it means to be an adult and all this stuff. And then when he came back, Silas was telling me about this. I was like, wow, that's really meaningful, that's really poignant. And Silas was like, yeah, and you know what my dad gave me as like my rite of passage? And I was like, what? He turns around and he shows a legitimate sword, a long sword,
Oh,
and he
really?
unsheathes it. I'm like, holy crap.
Oh, no
So
joke.
that's the family Silas grew up in.
Wow.
Yeah. So Silas ran D&D for me. I think at the time I wasn't ready for it necessarily. There also to a bit to the dismay of it. There weren't too many sessions that Silas was able to run that involved more than just me. So there were times where I'd come over to Silas's house and he'd try to run D&D solo session for me, which can go great, but it's just
Yeah.
not the same experience,
No.
especially as a first time playing with a
Right,
group.
right, 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 right.
So I didn't have the full picture of it. Um, but he was a great GM as well. I wish I could play under him more. Um, I need to reach back out to him, see what he's up to. I think he's a dad now. Um,
Wow.
but anyway, yeah, no. Other than that, I mean, obviously a lot with you as well. Um, and I feel like all of the GMs that I've played under have have influenced my GMing as well. I guess a button that we could put on this topic too is I feel like I'm curious to know what GMing you've watched because interestingly enough, although you're one is not a player in it, Critical Role is the one of the main reasons that I even got into playing D&D, or that's kind of what I count as the actual start of me playing D&D. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
my friend Silas running D&D for me technically was before that, but I didn't really know everything that was going on. I started my
Mm-hmm.
first home game running D&D for, my friend Elijah and Aaron and so on, um,
Did you
in
broadcast
2016.
that? You
No,
you you
never.
streamed that,
No.
didn't you?
Oh, a
You
later
streamed
part, like
something.
years later. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
okay,
We
okay,
tried it for a little bit,
okay.
but that fell apart. But anyway, yeah, watching GMs has been monumental for me.
Yeah,
And because you can watch or listen to GMing or actual plays, unfortunately or fortunately, far more often than you can play, because
yeah,
of scheduling. So
that's true.
I'm curious to know. I don't really know what, if any, shows that you listen or watch to, um, as far as GMing goes, or
I
if
got
any have
well,
had influence on you.
I got one for sure, that actually was later on, but it was one that was hugely important, because it came at a time when I was thinking about this is actually before I was streaming on Twitch, and it would started me thinking about doing DMing in a different way, and I had been away at that point from D&D for a few years because I had other things. I had a kid, and there were a bunch of other things going on. But it was, and I honestly think this also was really the dawn of the big renaissance in actual plays. Critical Role gets all the credit for it, but really the beginning of it was Penny Arcade and
Right.
Acquisitions Incorporated and all
Yep.
the audio stuff with Chris Perkins.
Yep.
I still think that Chris Perkins, I think, may be the best DM going. I think
Hmm.
it's close because Mercer, obviously Matt Mercer is amazing, and there are many other great DMs that people talk about. Brennan, right, with Dimension 20, and like
Right.
there are a number of people that are great DMs and GMs that you can listen to that are quite impressive. But the thing about Perkins is what he did super well was to take a group of people that were sort of generally nerdy and interested in this kind of thing, but did not do a lot of D&D stuff on their own. So that, for example, the first Penny Arcade one, Jerry Holkins did a lot of D&D, but Mike Krahulik had literally never done it at all. And so there was just kind of this like very ad hoc, audio, bringing the people together, and here's Perkins describing things,
Mm,
but the cadence, the way in which sort of the way in which Chris like constructs constructs the adventures, the way that he springs twists, how he manages combat at different levels, and particularly the little taglines, the way that he would, like, for example, just the way that he would speak dialogue.
yeah.
He looks at you and he sort of clears his throat and he says, "The thing I don't understand," and like
Mm,
the difference between just having that little tag of he looks at you and he says blah blah blah, that sounds very simple, but it was something which was very helpful to me to clarify who's
right.
speaking at what time and under what circumstances. And I think that Perkins' voices are fine, but he's nowhere near what Mercer is, because Matt Mercer's an actor. Like, obviously, Matt Mercer's voices are going to be off the charts. But I think that Chris is a little better about controlling a game than Matt is, slightly. I think
Mm,
that he's a little bit better about being able to, figure out pacing wise how to manage everything. And that's also partially because he's dealing with, in his case, 4 or 5 people, not 7 to 8 people that Matt's dealing with, all friends and all voice actors who
sure.
were all amazing players that you could just let go forever. So I recognize that. And
Yeah.
again, Matt Mercer is an incredible GM. But that it's just, those are just different strengths that I noticed from each of them. So honestly, I learned a great deal in 2008, 9, 10, 11, listening to all of those Acquisitions Incorporated shows, which were funny and goofy, and they were also inappropriate and risque, and like a lot of equivalent of fart jokes, and like, I mean,
Sure.
I would never claim that it was like brilliant storytelling with like incredible, it wasn't that, but just understanding the sort of pacing and how to manage it was really helpful. And they started with fourth edition when fourth edition was just about to come out,
Yeah.
and then that brought them all the way through D&D Next, all the way into fifth edition. So you got
Mm,
to hear the different ways in which Chris altered the way in which he was DMing, because the systems themselves were so
right.
different.
But also
So I
stayed
learned
consistent between
yeah,
systems.
yeah, absolutely, yeah. And it helps that Perkins is also the guy who's like the senior lead guy
Right.
who's like doing so much of this stuff on his own, so that also helps.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, that was definitely somebody that listening and watching the way that he did things was hugely helpful to me as a GM. Also, as one of the first public DMs, the one
Hmm.
who was like the first one to be putting this stuff out. Wizards was putting it out on their website. Later on, it showed up on YouTube. He then started doing the live stuff at Penny Arcade. That was
Yeah.
inspirational to me also for some of the live events that I've run at the symposium and at the Klein that you've been a part of. So yeah, no, I would say Chris Perkins and the Acquisitions Incorporated shows were very big things for me as a DM, as I transitioned into actually doing live streaming of this stuff too for an audience.
Mm.
That was very, very helpful to me. So that's an easy one for me. So who's yours? Like, is it Matt Mercer is the big one, the big, and Critical Role is the big influence for you, or?
This just in, Gen GMs say Matt Mercer is terrible dungeon. No, I'm just kidding.
No, he's
Um,
amazing.
he is. Uh, yeah, I mean, Critical Role. I got to talk to Matt very briefly at Big Bad Con, and I told him how he and Critical Role were, kind of the reason I started GMing, and then now this whole path that I'm on. Um, and so Critical Role got me into DMing, pretty much. Again, aside from the asterisk of when I played with my friend Silas, who
Right.
really introduced me to it, but uh, I would have to say that there's a lot that these different DMs are a part of. Something too. I man, we'll have to talk again about like other DMs and maybe make that a question sometime, because I would have to go through. Um, I think his name is Ruben Bressler. I might be saying his name wrong. On Twitter, or X, I guess. His username is Mox Ruby, I think, which is a play on the Mox
Yeah.
Ruby of Magic the Gathering.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
He
yeah.
DM'd a several session long Ravnica campaign, as well
Hmm.
as several others. And Ravnica is my
Yeah, yeah.
favorite D&D setting, strangely enough, and also Magic the Gathering setting. Um, his GMing of that was amazing in parts. There was also the GM for Guild Gates and Goblins, I think is what it was called. Yet another Ravnica campaign. I don't know if
Okay.
you're sensing a theme here.
Yes.
Um, I don't remember his name right now. I'll add it in post.
Okay.
But he was also amazing, and he I don't remember if he was running a module or not. I think he was coming up with it. So I don't know. There's aspects of that. Also a fan of Deborah Ann Wall. She has a
Mhm,
very whimsical sort of style to how she GMs that makes it
mhm.
feel much that kind of brings in that cozy vibe of again being like in the snowed in cabin and playing with your friends sort of thing. But
Yep.
then also she can get really really dark and creepy in a way that sort of draws you in. That's very interesting. Um, and Matt Mercer is amazing as well. I think his ability, especially as the campaigns have gone on now, his players have only become more uh more intense versions of themselves. I think as time has gone on,
Yeah,
and
no
so
kidding.
he's being able to manage the personalities at the table. I think, which
Mhm,
is a positive thing. Is a skill. I think. Um, I was also told this is a rumor, but I when I went to Big Bad Con, I forget who I mentioned this to, so you may have already heard this, but there were at Bad Con there were these signups for essentially like the day of games. I don't remember what they were called, the game room or something like that.
mhm.
There were games that were scheduled far in advance of the convention, like weeks or months. Like, hey, you're going to sign up, and I know on Saturday the whatever I'm going to play at this time. But also at the convention, the day of, you could walk into the game room and DMs showed up and had, two games prepared and you could choose which game you wanted to play and then it was like walk in, play a game.
Mhm.
And a rumor I was told by one person at Big Bad Con, so who knows, is that Matt Mercer did end up showing up for a meet and greet at Big Bad Con, but before that, he was around at the convention very briefly. When you're someone of that status, you're not going to be around for that long. Otherwise, you get swarmed by people.
Yep.
But this person told me that when you're at the game room, you go up and all you see are the games that are listed. Like, oh, this person's running a one shot of Vampire the Masquerade. This person's running a one shot of Blades in the Dark. Intro to
Yep.
Blades in the Dark. Da da da. Little blurb
Yep.
about it. You don't see who's DMing it. You only see for how long, how many players are needed, and all the games start at once. And which game you're a part of, everyone gets a card that tells you what order to come up in. So if you get the last card, unfortunately, you have to choose from the last games that are available on the table. Anyway, I was told that the the showrunners of the game room came in and they slotted in one last game that was new. I think it was a D&D game. I don't know actually what it was. And so some people were like, "Oh, that looks interesting," and they signed up for it. They go back, and in the back rooms, there are all these like curtained off, with curtains that have been set up areas for everyone to play games together. They're all in one big like multi-purpose room that's been curtained off into different game sections. And lo and behold, that table of people that joined that game that had just been added were DM'd by Matt Mercer, who
Oh,
surprisingly came in and had something prepared, a one shot to run for just generic Big Bad Con attendees, like 4 to 6 people. Imagine that walking back there and Matt Mercer is your random
that's
DM.
wild. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So anyway, the I forget why I brought that up, but his aspect of like he's had to handle uh his table of the same players quite often. But that's something I would love to talk to him about or hear from him about, is like that experience of running for those strangers, because
Mhm.
in our capacity that's something that he doesn't get to do very often anymore. um anyway, that was a side tangent. The ultimate answer to your question is my favorite DM at the moment is Brennan Lee Mulligan. I think he that uh, a lot of DMing is one's personality and life experience in how they tell
Sure.
stories, because it's just storytelling. And Brennan, he has camp counselor written all over him as a camp counselor. That is something that he was. And that just his style of that, and the dialogue, and he also brings in voices in his comedy. Um, and he has really intense, poignant moments. You'll see clips of the campaigns that he's run circulated, viral moments and stuff. So yeah, I think without getting too much into it, he's been a big influence on helping me think about how games could be run rather than your
Mhm.
traditional. here's just the mechanics, but more leading into the storytelling, and the mechanics are there when we need them, sort of style. But
Absolutely. How do you pace the arc? How do you,
right.
constructure when these things, how you create the beats? And yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, that's a good one.
So
That's a good one.
anyway, all right. Well, I think that's
Did it.
everything. We hit all sorts of different topics, and I think next time we'll have all sorts of different questions too. One thing for sure is we're going everywhere, and we're leaving no stone unturned, I think.
We're we are
So
gonna stretch everything we can, and we should say, for folks who are enjoying this, this is a new venture, this particular thing for both of us. And if you like GenGMs, please do subscribe to us on this YouTube channel and let people know. And also drop some questions for us, also, if they're ones that you'd like either of us to address or take on, be it within the direct, mechanics of XYZ, or be it something broader about what do you think about trend ABC,
yeah.
within the industry. We're all about talking about it if it's in the tabletop side of things. So yeah, you've been listening to Zach Clay over there.
Yes, and you've been listening to Gregory Wilson over there. Well, literally on opposite coasts of the country, by the way.
That is quite right.
Yeah.
Exactly. He's on
Yep.
the, and it fits too, because he's on the left coast and I'm on the right coast. So,
Yep.
so it works.
We're bridging that gap just for all of you.
That's right.
Cool.
We'll see you people soon.
And there we go.